Officer Sarah Mitchell had been walking the downtown beat for 3 years, but she had never seen anything quite like what happened that Tuesday morning. The autumn air was crisp, and the streets of Millbrook were just beginning to fill, with the usual morning rush of commuters and shopkeepers opening their doors. Sarah was making her routine patrol down Main Street when she noticed Mrs. Henderson struggling with her golden retriever, Max. The elderly woman was clearly having trouble controlling the large dog, who seemed unusually agitated about something ahead of them on the sidewalk. Max was a well-known neighborhood dog, beloved by everyone who knew him. He was gentle, friendly, and had never shown aggression toward anyone in the 5 years Mrs. Henderson had owned him. Local shop owners would often give him treats, and children would run up to pet his golden fur whenever they saw him on his daily walks. But today was different. Max's entire body was tense, his ears pinned back, and a low growl was rumbling from deep in his chest. His hackles were raised, and his eyes were fixed on something down the street with an intensity that made Sarah take notice. "Easy, Max," Mrs. Henderson was saying, pulling firmly on his leash. "I don't know what's gotten into him today, Officer Mitchell. He's been acting strange ever since we left the house this morning." Sarah followed Max's gaze and saw a man in his 40s walking slowly down the opposite side of the street. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, nothing particularly unusual about his appearance. He had short brown hair and was of average height and build. To Sarah's trained eye, he looked like any other resident going about his morning business. The man seemed to notice the commotion and glanced over at them. When his eyes met Max's, the dog's reaction became even more violent. Max began barking furiously, straining against his leash with such force that Mrs. Henderson nearly lost her footing. "Max, stop it," the elderly woman commanded, but the dog was beyond listening. His barks were sharp and urgent, the kind of sound Sarah had learned to recognize as a warning. In her years of police work, she had developed a respect for dogs and their instincts. They could sense things that humans often missed. The stranger across the street paused for a moment, watching the scene unfold. His expression was unreadable, but something about his stillness made Sarah feel uneasy. Most people would either try to calm the situation with soothing words or hurry away from an aggressive dog. This man did neither. He simply stood there observing. Sarah approached Mrs. Henderson and gently took hold of Max's leash to help steady the situation. The moment her hand touched the leather strap, she could feel the tremendous tension in the dog's body. Max was practically vibrating with alertness and aggression. "Has Max ever reacted like this before?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm while her eyes remained on the stranger across the street. "Never," Mrs. Henderson replied, breathing heavily from the exertion of trying to control her pet. "He's the friendliest dog you could imagine. Just yesterday, he was playing with the Johnson children in the park. I can't understand what's wrong with him." Sarah noticed that the man had begun walking again, moving slowly down the street but frequently glancing back at them. Each time he looked in their direction, Max's barking intensified. The dog was clearly trying to communicate something urgent, but what? Other pedestrians were beginning to stop and stare at the commotion. Sarah could see concerned faces peering out from shop windows, and a few people had pulled out their phones, probably recording the unusual scene of a normally docile dog having what appeared to be a complete breakdown. "Let me help you get Max somewhere quiet," Sarah suggested, guiding Mrs. Henderson toward the small park at the end of the block. But as they moved, Max kept looking back over his shoulder, continuing to bark at the retreating figure of the man in the dark jacket. The park was mostly empty except for a jogger and an elderly man feeding pigeons on a bench. As soon as they were away from the main street, Max's behavior began to change slightly. His barking stopped, but he remained alert and agitated, panting heavily and whining softly. Sarah knelt down beside the golden retriever, speaking to him in soothing tones while studying his behavior. In her police training, she had learned about the reliability of canine instincts. Police dogs were trained to detect drugs, explosives, and even track suspects because of their incredible sensory abilities. While Max wasn't a trained police dog, his natural instincts were still far superior to any humans. "Mrs. Henderson, can you think of anything unusual that happened recently? Anyone new in the neighborhood? Any changes in Max's routine?" Sarah asked, still watching the dog carefully. The elderly woman thought for a moment, adjusting her glasses. "Well, we have been taking a different route for our walks lately. The construction on Elm Street has forced us to come this way for the past week, but Max seemed to enjoy the change until today. Sarah made a mental note of this information. Sometimes dogs could pick up on scents or sounds that lingered in an area long after the source had moved on. If there had been some kind of incident along their new walking route, Max might be reacting to residual evidence that humans couldn't detect. As they sat in the park, Sarah found herself thinking about the stranger's reaction to Max's aggressive behavior. Something about the man's calm, almost analytical response bothered her. Most innocent people would show concern, confusion, or at least some emotional reaction to being the target of such intense hostility from a dog. But this man had seemed almost clinical in his observation of the situation. Max was finally beginning to calm down, though he remained alert and kept looking back toward Main Street. Sarah decided to walk Mrs. Henderson and Max home, taking note of their route and keeping an eye out for anything that might explain the dog's unusual behavior. As they walked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Max had been trying to tell them something important. The intensity and specificity of his reaction to that particular stranger suggested that this wasn't just a case of a dog having a bad day. In her experience, animals didn't react that strongly without good reason. Little did Sarah know that Max's instincts were about to lead her into one of the most challenging cases of her career, and that the stranger in the dark jacket was just the beginning of a mystery that would change everything she thought she knew about her quiet neighborhood. The next morning, Sarah found herself thinking about Max and the mysterious stranger as she prepared for her shift. She had filed a routine report about the incident, but something kept nagging at her. During her years as a police officer, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now they were telling her that yesterday's encounter was more significant than it appeared. Sarah decided to start her patrol earlier than usual and take the same route where she had met Mrs. Henderson and Max. The morning was quiet, with only a few early commuters and shop owners beginning their day. As she walked down Main Street, she paid careful attention to every detail, looking for anything that might explain Max's extreme reaction. Near the spot where the incident had occurred, Sarah noticed something she had missed the day before. There was a small alley between two buildings that she had never really paid attention to. It was narrow and shadowy, the kind of place that could easily be overlooked unless someone was specifically looking for it. As she approached the alley, she caught a faint smell that made her stop. It was subtle, but there was definitely an odd odor coming from the narrow passageway. Sarah pulled out her flashlight and carefully made her way into the alley, stepping around scattered trash and broken bottles. About halfway down the alley, her flashlight beam illuminated something that made her heart skip a beat. There were dark stains on the concrete wall and ground that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The stains were old, probably several days, but they were definitely there. Sarah immediately called for backup and began securing the scene. While she waited for the crime scene team to arrive, she carefully documented everything she could see without disturbing any potential evidence. The bloodstains formed a pattern that suggested someone had been injured here, possibly seriously. Detective James Cooper arrived within 20 minutes, along with the forensics team. Cooper was a veteran investigator in his 50s who had seen just about everything in his 25 years on the force. He had a reputation for being thorough and methodical, exactly the kind of person Sarah wanted working on this case. "What made you check this alley?" Cooper asked as the forensics team began their work. Sarah explained about Max's reaction to the stranger and how it had bothered her enough to come back and investigate further. Cooper listened carefully, nodding as she described the dog's unusual behavior and the man's odd reaction to it. "I've worked with K9 units for years," Cooper said, examining the bloodstains. "Dogs can smell blood days after humans can't detect it anymore. If this blood has been here for a while, that dog could have picked up the scent from quite a distance." The forensics team worked methodically, photographing the scene and collecting samples. They found several items of interest, including what appeared to be torn fabric caught on a piece of broken concrete and some scattered personal belongings that looked like they had been dropped during a struggle. Among the items was a woman's earring, still bright silver despite being in the alley for what appeared to be several days. There was also a small notebook with some pages torn out, though what remained was water-damaged and difficult to read. "Any missing person reports lately?" Sarah asked Cooper as they watched the evidence being collected. Cooper pulled out his phone and began scrolling through recent reports. Actually, yes. Linda Martinez, 34 years old, was reported missing by her sister 4 days ago. She was last seen leaving work at the accounting firm downtown. Her car was found in the parking garage, but there was no sign of her. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The timeline matched perfectly with when the bloodstains appeared to have been made. Do we have a description of what she was wearing? Silver jewelry, including distinctive hoop earrings, Cooper read from his phone. He looked at the earring the forensics team had just bagged. We'll need to have her sister identify this, but it could be a match. As the investigation continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the stranger Max had reacted to so violently. If this alley was indeed a crime scene, and if that man was somehow connected to what had happened here, then Max's instincts had potentially identified a suspect in a serious crime. We need to find that man, Sarah told Cooper, describing the stranger in as much detail as she could remember. Average height, brown hair, dark jacket. He was very calm when Max was going crazy, almost like he was studying the situation. Cooper made notes and promised to have officers canvass the area with the description. But Sarah had a feeling that finding the man wouldn't be easy. Something about his behavior suggested he was careful, and probably not a local resident who could be easily tracked down. The forensics team finished their work by late afternoon, taking away bags of evidence for analysis. The blood samples would be tested for DNA, and the personal items would be examined for fingerprints and other clues. But Sarah knew that lab results could take days or even weeks. As she completed her shift, Sarah decided to stop by Mrs. Henderson's house to check on Max and ask a few more questions. The elderly woman was surprised to see her but welcomed her in warmly. Max greeted Sarah with his usual friendly demeanor, his tail wagging and his eyes bright and alert. It was hard to believe this was the same dog who had been so aggressively focused on the stranger just 24 hours earlier. "I'm glad you came by," Mrs. Henderson said, offering Sarah a cup of tea. "Max has been acting strangely all day. He keeps going to the window and whining like he's looking for something or someone." Sarah accepted the tea and sat down in the comfortable living room, watching Max as he paced restlessly near the front window. The dog would occasionally stop and stare out at the street, his body tense with alertness. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you about yesterday again. When Max first started reacting to that man, where exactly were you? Can you remember the precise location?" The elderly woman thought carefully. "We were right in front of Murphy's hardware store. Max had been fine up until that point, and then suddenly he just went crazy. It was like a switch had been flipped." Sarah made a mental note of the location. Murphy's hardware was directly across from the alley, where they had found the bloodstains. If Max had caught the scent from there, it meant his sense of smell was even more remarkable than she had initially thought. "Has Max ever been used for any kind of tracking or search work?" Sarah asked. "Not officially, but he's always been amazing at finding things. Last year when my neighbor's cat went missing, Max led us right to where it was hiding under a shed 3 blocks away. And he once found my lost keys in a snowbank just by sniffing around the yard." As Sarah prepared to leave, she gave Mrs. Henderson her card and asked her to call immediately if Max showed any unusual behavior, or if she saw the stranger again. She had a strong feeling that this case was far from over, and that Max's incredible instincts were going to play a crucial role in solving what was looking more and more like a serious crime. 2 days later, Sarah received the call she had been both expecting and dreading. The lab results were in, and Detective Cooper wanted to meet with her immediately. She found him in the conference room at the police station, surrounded by case files and forensic reports. "The blood is definitely human," Cooper began without preamble. "And we got a DNA match from the missing person database. It belongs to Linda Martinez, the accountant who disappeared 4 days ago." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What had started as a curious incident with a dog had now become a confirmed violent crime. What about the other evidence? The earring was positively identified by Linda's sister as belonging to her. The fabric we found appears to be from a woman's blouse, consistent with what Linda was wearing when she disappeared. And here's the interesting part. Cooper slid a photograph across the table. The notebook we found had some writing that survived the water damage. Sarah studied the photograph of the notebook page. The writing was faded and smudged, but she could make out what appeared to be a license plate number and the word "followed," written in urgent handwriting. Linda knew she was in danger. Cooper continued. According to her sister, Linda had mentioned feeling like someone was watching her for about a week. before she disappeared. She thought she was being paranoid, but apparently her instincts were right. The implications of this discovery hit Sarah immediately. If Linda had written down a license plate number because she felt she was being followed, then she had identified her potential attacker before the crime occurred. This could be the break they needed to find both Linda and her attacker. "Have we run the plate number?" Sarah asked, already on it. "The partial number we can make out matches several vehicles in the database, but we're narrowing it down based on the vehicle, type and color that witnesses reported seeing in the area around the time Linda disappeared." Cooper pulled out another file and showed Sarah surveillance footage from the parking garage where Linda's car had been found. The timestamp showed Linda arriving at work normally that morning, but there was also footage of a dark sedan circling the garage multiple times over the course of the day. This sedan appears in the footage several times, always with the same driver. Unfortunately, the angle and lighting make it impossible to get a clear view of the license plate or the driver's face. Sarah studied the grainy footage, trying to make out details of the car and its occupant. The vehicle was dark-colored, possibly black or dark blue, and appeared to be a mid-size sedan. The driver seemed to be wearing dark clothing, which matched her memory of the stranger Max had reacted to so strongly. "I think this might be our man," Sarah said, pointing to the shadowy figure behind the wheel. The build and clothing seemed consistent with the person Max identified. Cooper nodded. "That's what I'm thinking too. But we need more than a dog's reaction and some grainy surveillance footage to build a case. We need to find this guy." Over the next several hours, Sarah and Cooper worked with the department's technical team to enhance the surveillance footage and cross-reference the partial license plate number with vehicle registrations in the area. It was painstaking work, but gradually they began to narrow down the possibilities. By late afternoon, they had identified 3 vehicles that matched the partial plate number and vehicle description. 2 belonged to local residents with no criminal history, but the third was registered to a man named David Chen, who had a record of stalking and harassment charges from another state. David Chen, 38 years old, moved to the area about 6 months ago. Cooper read from the file. Previous arrest for stalking, harassment, and assault. He was served with a restraining order by an ex-girlfriend in his previous city, but the charges were dropped when she moved away and declined to testify. Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with concern. This could be their suspect, but it also meant that Linda Martinez might not be his first victim. "Do we have a current address for Chen?" "We do, but there's a problem. He hasn't been seen at his registered address for over a week. The landlord says he paid his rent early and mentioned he might be traveling for work." The timing was suspicious. If Chen had disappeared around the same time as Linda Martinez, it suggested that he might have fled after committing the crime. But it also raised troubling questions about Linda's current whereabouts and condition. Sarah suggested they visit Chen's apartment building to see if any neighbors had seen him recently or noticed anything unusual. Cooper agreed, and they drove across town to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building manager, a tired-looking man in his 60s, confirmed that Chen had been a quiet tenant who kept to himself. "He paid his bills on time and never caused any trouble," the manager said. "But now that you mention it, he did seem nervous the last time I saw him." "That was about a week ago." "Nervous how?" Cooper asked. "Jumpy, like he was expecting bad news. And he kept looking over his shoulder when he was walking to his car. I thought maybe he was having money troubles or something." Sarah and Cooper obtained permission to examine Chen's apartment. What they found inside painted a disturbing picture of a man who had been planning something for a long time. The apartment was neat and organized, but there were clear signs that Chen had left in a hurry. Clothes were missing from the closet, and personal items were gone from the bathroom and bedroom. But what caught Sarah's attention were the items he had left behind. On a desk in the small living room, they found a collection of photographs taken with a telephoto lens. The photos showed Linda Martinez going about her daily routine, getting coffee, walking to her car, leaving her apartment. Some of the photos were date-stamped, showing that Chen had been following and photographing Linda for at least 2 weeks before her disappearance. "This is definitely our guy," Cooper said grimly, bagging the photographs as evidence. "The question now is where he took her and whether she's still alive." Sarah examined the apartment more carefully, looking for any clues about where Chen might have gone. In the kitchen, she found something that made her pulse quicken. Taped to the inside of a cabinet door was a hand-drawn map showing several locations outside the city. "Cooper, look at this," she called, pointing to the map. Several locations were marked with red X's, and one was circled multiple times. The circled location appeared to be a remote area about 30 miles outside the city, near an abandoned industrial complex. "If he's taken her somewhere to hold her, this might be where," Sarah said. "It's isolated off the main roads and the kind of place where no one would think to look." Cooper studied the map carefully. "We need to get out there, but we're going to need backup and probably a search and rescue team. If Linda is being held at this location, we need to be prepared for anything." As they prepared to leave Chen's apartment, Sarah couldn't help but think about Max and his incredible instincts. The golden retriever had somehow sensed that the man he encountered was dangerous, possibly identifying him as the person responsible for the violence that had occurred in that alley. Without Max's reaction, they might never have investigated the alley or discovered the evidence that led them to Chen. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important clues come from the most unexpected sources. The abandoned industrial complex sat like a forgotten monument to better economic times, its empty buildings casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Sarah and Detective Cooper had arrived with a full tactical team, including search and rescue specialists and a K-9 unit. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone's minds as they prepared to search the sprawling facility. The complex had been shut down for over 3 years, leaving behind a maze of empty warehouses, office buildings, and maintenance structures. Weeds had grown up through cracks in the concrete, and many of the windows were broken or boarded up. It was exactly the kind of isolated location where someone could hide for weeks without being discovered. "We need to be systematic about this," Cooper told the team as they gathered around a map of the facility. "The area is too large to search randomly. We'll divide into 3 teams and work our way through each building methodically." Sarah was assigned to Team 2, along with Officer Jake Martinez and Sergeant Lisa Wong from the K-9 unit. Wong's German Shepherd, Rex, was trained in both tracking and search and rescue operations. As they approached the first warehouse, Sarah found herself thinking about Max and how his natural instincts had started this entire investigation. The warehouse doors were chained shut, but the chains were newer than the rust on the building suggested they should be. "Someone's been here recently," Martinez observed, examining the locks more closely. Wong had Rex sniff around the entrance while she and Sarah checked for other ways into the building. The dog immediately became alert, his nose working frantically as he picked up scents that interested him. His behavior reminded Sarah strongly of Max's reaction to the stranger on Main Street. "Rex is definitely picking up something," Wong reported through her radio. "Human scent, and it's fresh." They found a side door that had been forced open, its frame splintered where someone had used a crowbar or similar tool to break the lock. Inside, the warehouse was dark and filled with shadows created by old machinery and equipment that had been left behind when the company closed. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the concrete floor, revealing tire tracks in the dust and what appeared to be recent footprints. The tracks led deeper into the warehouse toward a section that had once housed administrative offices. As they followed the trail, Rex became increasingly agitated. His whines echoed in the empty space, and he kept looking back at Wong as if trying to communicate something urgent. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as they approached the office area at the back of the warehouse. The office section consisted of several small rooms connected by a narrow hallway. Most of the doors stood open, revealing empty spaces with broken furniture and water damage from roof leaks. But one door at the end of the hall was closed, and there was a new padlock on the outside. "This is it," Sarah whispered into her radio, alerting the other teams to their location. Wong commanded Rex to stay back while she and Sarah approached the locked door. They could hear something from inside, a faint sound that might have been movement or breathing. Sarah's training kicked in as she positioned herself beside the door, her weapon drawn and ready. Cooper's voice crackled through the radio. "We're 2 minutes out. Wait for backup before you breach." But as they waited, the sounds from inside the room became more distinct. Someone was definitely in there, and they seemed to be in distress. Sarah could hear what sounded like muffled cries for help. "We can't wait," Sarah told Wong. "If that's Linda Martinez in there, she might be in immediate danger." Wong nodded and took position on the other side of the door while Sarah used a bolt cutter from her equipment kit to cut through the padlock. The metal gave way with a sharp snap that seemed to echo through the entire warehouse. Sarah slowly pushed the door open, her flashlight illuminating the small room beyond. What she saw made her gasp with a mixture of relief and horror. Linda Martinez was alive, but barely. She was tied to a chair in the center of the room, her clothes torn and dirty, her face showing signs of abuse and dehydration. Her eyes were wide with terror. But when she saw Sarah's police uniform, tears of relief began streaming down her face. "Linda, my name is Officer Mitchell. You're safe now," Sarah said, holstering her weapon and rushing to untie the ropes that bound the woman to the chair. Linda was weak and could barely speak, but she managed to whisper, "He said he'd be back tonight. He's been gone since this morning." Wong immediately called for medical assistance while Sarah carefully freed Linda from her restraints. The woman had been held captive for 4 days, given minimal food and water, and had been terrorized by her captor. But she was alive, and that was what mattered most. As the paramedics arrived and began treating Linda, Cooper and the rest of the team secured the scene and began collecting evidence. The room where Linda had been held contained items that clearly belonged to Chen, including clothes and personal effects that matched what neighbors had described seeing him wear. "He's definitely been living here," Cooper observed, examining a sleeping bag and camping equipment set up in an adjacent room. "But where is he now?" Sarah was helping Linda into the ambulance when the injured woman grabbed her arm weakly. "Officer, there's something you need to know," Linda whispered urgently. "He talked about other women. He said I wasn't his first and I wouldn't be his last." The implications of Linda's words sent a chill through Sarah. If Chen had other victims, there might be more women out there who needed help. Or worse, there might be other crime scenes they hadn't discovered yet. As the ambulance pulled away with Linda inside, Sarah found herself looking out across the vast industrial complex. There were dozens of buildings, countless hiding places where evidence or even other victims might be concealed. The investigation was far from over. Cooper approached her as the sun began to set, casting eerie shadows across the abandoned facility. "We're going to set up surveillance here in case Chen comes back," he said. "And we're putting out an APB with his photo and vehicle description. But something tells me he's not going to make this easy." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already working on the next steps. They needed to search Chen's background more thoroughly, looking for connections to other missing person cases. They needed to examine his computer and phone records to see if he had been communicating with anyone else or researching other potential victims. Most importantly, they needed to find David Chen before he could hurt anyone else. Thanks to Max's incredible instincts and the investigation that followed, they had saved Linda Martinez's life. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more pieces to this puzzle, and that Chen's capture would reveal even darker secrets. As the tactical team began their methodical search of the remaining buildings, Sarah made a mental note to stop by Mrs. Henderson's house on her way home. She wanted to thank Max personally for his role in solving this case. Without that golden retriever's natural ability to sense danger, Linda Martinez might never have been found alive. The manhunt for David Chen had been ongoing for 36 hours when Sarah received an unexpected phone call. It was Mrs. Henderson, and her voice was shaking with excitement and fear. "Officer Mitchell, you need to come quickly," the elderly woman said breathlessly. "Max is acting up again, just like before. He's at the back door going absolutely crazy, and I think there's someone in my yard." Sarah was at the police station reviewing Chen's case files when the call came in. She immediately grabbed her radio and called for backup while rushing to her patrol car. If Chen was desperate enough to return to the area where he had first been identified, it meant he was either extremely bold or extremely foolish. As she drove toward Mrs. Henderson's house, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Chen had to know that the police were looking for him. His picture had been on the local news and there was an active manhunt underway. Why would he risk coming back to the neighborhood where he had first been spotted? Sarah arrived at Mrs. Henderson's house to find the elderly woman peering out her front window, clearly frightened. Max was pacing back and forth at the back door, his barks sharp and urgent. Even from the front of the house, Sarah could hear the intensity in the dog's voice. "He started about 10 minutes ago," Mrs. Henderson explained as she let Sarah in. "I was watching the evening news when Max suddenly bolted to the back door and started carrying on. I looked out the window, but I couldn't see anything in the dark." Sarah drew her weapon and carefully made her way through the house toward the back door. Max's behavior was identical to what she had witnessed 4 days earlier on Main Street. The dog was focused, alert, and clearly agitated by something specific outside. Through the back door's window, Sarah could see Mrs. Henderson's small backyard, which was bordered by a tall wooden fence and some overgrown bushes. The yard appeared empty, but the shadows created by the neighbors' security lights made it difficult to see clearly. Mrs. Henderson, "I want you to go to your front room and lock the door behind you," Sarah instructed quietly. "Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Backup was still several minutes away, but Sarah couldn't wait. If Chen was indeed in the backyard, he might be planning to break into the house or escape through the adjoining properties. She needed to act quickly. Sarah unlocked the back door and stepped out onto the small porch, her flashlight in one hand and her weapon in the other. Max immediately tried to follow her, but she firmly commanded him to stay inside. She needed to investigate without the distraction of an excited dog. As she swept her flashlight across the yard, Sarah saw something that made her heart race. There were fresh footprints in the soft soil near the fence, and some of the bushes showed signs of recent disturbance. Someone had definitely been in the yard, and possibly very recently. Sarah followed the footprints to the back fence, where she discovered that several boards had been loosened, creating a gap large enough for a person to squeeze through. The opening led to the alley that ran behind the row of houses, providing a potential escape route for anyone who wanted to avoid the street. Just as Sarah was examining the fence, she heard a sound that made her freeze. It was the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, coming from the alley on the other side of the fence. Someone was definitely there, trying to move quietly but not quite succeeding. Sarah keyed her radio and whispered her location to the backup units that were en route. Then she carefully approached the gap in the fence, listening intently for any further sounds from the alley. Through the opening, she could see a figure moving slowly along the alley, staying close to the shadows. The person was wearing dark clothing and appeared to be of average height and build, matching the description of David Chen. Sarah knew she had to make a decision quickly. She could wait for backup and risk letting the suspect escape, or she could attempt to apprehend him herself and risk a dangerous confrontation. Her training and experience told her to wait, but her instinct said that this might be their only chance to catch Chen. "Police, stop and put your hands where I can see them," Sarah called out, shining her flashlight through the gap in the fence. The figure immediately bolted, running down the alley away from Sarah's position. She squeezed through the fence opening and gave chase, radioing her direction of pursuit to the backup units. The alley was narrow and poorly lit, filled with trash cans, abandoned furniture, and other obstacles that made running treacherous. Sarah kept her flashlight trained on the fleeing figure, while trying to avoid tripping over the debris scattered along the ground. The suspect turned left at the end of the alley, heading toward a more residential area. Sarah followed, her breathing becoming labored as the chase continued. She could hear sirens in the distance indicating that backup was getting closer. But the suspect was fast and seemed to know the neighborhood well. As they emerged from the alley onto a side street, Sarah got her first clear look at the person she was chasing. It was definitely a man of the right age and build to be David Chen, and he was wearing the same type of dark jacket that witnesses had described. The suspect ran across the street and into another alley, this one leading back toward the commercial district. Sarah followed, but she was beginning to lose ground. The man was clearly in good physical condition and had the advantage of knowing exactly where he was going. Just as Sarah was starting to worry that she might lose him, she heard the sound of car doors slamming and running footsteps coming from the other direction. Her backup had arrived and was moving to cut off the suspect's escape route. The suspect must have heard the same sounds because he suddenly stopped running and looked around frantically, apparently realizing that he was about to be surrounded. He ducked into the doorway of an abandoned building, clearly hoping to hide until the police passed by. But Sarah had seen exactly where he went. She approached the doorway carefully, her weapon drawn and her flashlight ready. 2 other officers appeared at the far end of the alley, effectively trapping the suspect between them. "David Chen, this is the police," Sarah called out. "You're surrounded. Come out with your hands visible and surrender peacefully." For a moment there was only silence. Then Sarah heard a voice from the doorway, strained and desperate. "You don't understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Come out slowly with your hands up, and we can talk about it," Sarah responded, maintaining her position while the other officers moved closer. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the doorway. It was indeed David Chen, and he looked exactly as Sarah remembered from their brief encounter on Main Street 4 days earlier. His dark jacket was torn and dirty from running, and his face showed the strain of days spent hiding and running from the law. Chen raised his hands above his head, but Sarah could see that he was trembling. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or something else, she couldn't tell. The other officers quickly moved in to handcuff him while Sarah kept her weapon trained on him as a precaution. "David Chen, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and assault of Linda Martinez," Sarah announced as the handcuffs clicked into place. As they led Chen toward the patrol cars, Sarah couldn't help but think about the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had all started with Max's incredible instincts and his ability to sense that something was wrong with this man. Without the dog's reaction, they might never have investigated the alley or discovered the evidence that led them to Linda. Chen was quiet during the transport to the police station, staring out the window with a distant expression. Sarah found herself studying his face, trying to understand what had driven him to commit such terrible crimes. He looked like an ordinary person, the kind of man you might pass on the street without giving a second thought. At the station, Detective Cooper took over the interrogation while Sarah observed from behind one-way glass. Chen initially remained silent, but as the evidence mounted against him, he gradually began to talk. What emerged was a disturbing picture of a man who had been planning and executing these crimes for much longer than they had initially suspected. Chen admitted to stalking Linda Martinez for weeks before attacking her in the alley. He had been studying her routines, learning her schedule, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. But most disturbing of all were Chen's admissions about other victims. Linda Martinez had been right when she told Sarah that she wasn't his first victim. Chen revealed that he had committed similar crimes in 2 other cities before moving to their area. "I never meant to hurt anyone permanently," Chen said during the interrogation, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to feel in control for once in my life. But then things would go too far and I'd have to move on." Cooper pressed him for details about the other victims, and Chen eventually provided information that would help police in other jurisdictions solve several cold cases. The man they had caught wasn't just a local criminal, but a serial predator who had been operating across multiple states. As the interrogation continued into the early hours of the morning, Sarah stepped outside the station for some fresh air. The night was quiet now, a stark contrast to the chaos of the chase and arrest. She thought about Linda Martinez, who was recovering in the hospital, and about Mrs. Henderson and Max, who were probably sleeping peacefully in their home. The case had been solved, but Sarah knew that the real hero of this story was a golden retriever, who had trusted his instincts and refused to be ignored. Max's natural ability to sense danger had not only saved Linda's life, but had also led to the capture of a dangerous criminal who might have continued hurting people for years to come. Sarah made a mental note to arrange for Max to receive some kind of recognition for his role in solving the case. It wasn't every day that a pet dog helped police solve a major crime, and Max's contribution deserved to be acknowledged. As she prepared to finish her paperwork and head home, Sarah realized that this case had taught her something important about paying attention to the subtle signs that others might miss. Sometimes the most valuable clues come from the most unexpected sources, and it pays to trust your instincts, even when they come from a 4-legged partner who can't speak, but knows how to communicate in his own way. 3 weeks after David Chen's arrest, Sarah found herself back on Main Street, but this time for a very different reason. The entire community had come together to honor Max and recognize his extraordinary contribution to solving one of the most serious crimes in the city's recent history. The ceremony was being held in the small park where Sarah had first taken Mrs. Henderson and Max to calm the agitated dog. Local news crews were present, along with the mayor, police chief, and dozens of community members who had followed the story as it unfolded in the media. Mrs. Henderson looked proud but slightly overwhelmed by all the attention as she stood beside Max, who was wearing a special collar for the occasion. The golden retriever seemed to sense that something important was happening, but he was more interested in the treats that various children kept offering him than in the speeches being given in his honor. Police Chief Robert Williams stepped up to the microphone that had been set up for the ceremony. "Today we're here to recognize a very special member of our community," he began. "Max may not wear a badge or carry a gun, but his instincts and courage helped our officers solve a serious crime and save a life." Sarah watched from the crowd as the chief described the case and Max's crucial role in identifying David Chen. The story had captured the public's imagination, and Max had become something of a local celebrity. Children from the neighborhood had been stopping by Mrs. Henderson's house just to meet the famous crime-fighting dog. Detective Cooper approached Sarah as the ceremony continued. "Any word on how Linda Martinez is doing?" he asked quietly. "She's recovering well," Sarah replied, "both physically and emotionally. She started back to work part-time last week, and she's been seeing a counselor to help deal with the trauma. She actually wanted to be here today to thank Max personally, but her doctor thought the crowds might be too overwhelming for her right now." Cooper nodded understandingly. "What about Chen? Any updates on his case?" "He's been charged with kidnapping, assault, and a dozen other counts related to Linda's case. But that's just the beginning. Police departments in 3 other states are building cases against him based on the information he provided during his confession. The revelation that Chen had been a serial predator operating across multiple states had shocked everyone involved in the case. What had started as a missing person investigation had uncovered a pattern of crime that stretched back several years and covered hundreds of miles. As the ceremony continued, Sarah thought about the lessons she had learned from this case. The most important was the value of paying attention to subtle signs and trusting instincts, even when they came from unexpected sources. Max's reaction to Chen had been the first and most crucial clue in solving the case. Mayor Patricia Gonzalez took the microphone next, holding a special medal that had been created specifically for Max. "This medal represents our community's gratitude for Max's service," she announced. "But more than that, it reminds us that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that sometimes the most important contributions come from those who can't even speak for themselves." Mrs. Henderson was invited to the microphone to say a few words. The elderly woman was clearly nervous about speaking in front of such a large crowd, but her voice was strong and clear as she began to speak. "I've had Max for 5 years now, and I've always known he was special," she said. "But I never imagined that his instincts would help solve a crime and save someone's life. I'm proud of him, but I'm also grateful to Officer Mitchell and Detective Cooper for listening to what Max was trying to tell them." The crowd applauded warmly as Mrs. Henderson bent down to place the medal around Max's neck. The golden retriever sat patiently for the ceremony, his tail wagging slightly as he accepted the honor, with the same gentle dignity he showed in all his interactions. Sarah was surprised when Chief Williams called her name and asked her to come forward. Officer Mitchell's decision to investigate Max's unusual behavior was the key to solving this case, the chief announced. Her willingness to trust a dog's instincts and follow up on what others might have dismissed as unimportant shows the kind of police work that makes our community safer. As Sarah accepted her own commendation, she looked out at the crowd and saw many familiar faces. There were shop owners from Main Street who had watched the original incident unfold, neighbors who had helped with the investigation, and fellow officers who had worked tirelessly to track down Chen and rescue Linda Martinez. But the person Sarah was most happy to see was Linda Martinez herself, who had apparently decided to attend the ceremony despite her doctor's concerns. The young woman was standing at the back of the crowd wearing sunglasses and a hat, but Sarah recognized her immediately. After the formal ceremony ended, Sarah made her way through the crowd to where Linda was standing. The 2 women embraced briefly, and Sarah could see that Linda was still dealing with the emotional aftermath of her ordeal, but she seemed stronger than she had been in the hospital. "I wanted to thank you again," Linda said quietly, "and I especially wanted to thank Max. If he hadn't reacted the way he did to that man, I might never have been found." Sarah introduced Linda to Mrs. Henderson and Max, and the elderly woman was visibly moved by the opportunity to meet the person whose life her dog had helped save. Max, for his part, seemed to sense Linda's emotional state and gently nuzzled her hand, offering the kind of comfort that only animals can provide. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that morning 3 weeks ago, when she had first encountered Mrs. Henderson struggling with an agitated golden retriever. What had seemed like a minor incident at the time had evolved into one of the most significant cases of her career. The story of Max and his crime-fighting instincts had been picked up by national news outlets, bringing positive attention to both the police department and the community. More importantly, it had raised awareness about the value of paying attention to animal behavior and trusting instincts, even when they seemed to contradict logic. Several police departments had contacted Chief Williams asking for information about incorporating civilian dogs into their community policing efforts. While Max would never be an official police dog, his contribution had demonstrated the potential value of partnerships between law enforcement and observant pet owners. As Sarah prepared to return to her regular patrol duties, she made a promise to herself to pay more attention to the subtle signs and signals that might indicate trouble. Max had taught her that sometimes the most important clues are the ones that can't be explained logically, and that instincts, whether human or canine, should never be ignored. The golden retriever had shown remarkable courage and persistence in trying to communicate what he had sensed about David Chen. In doing so, he had not only saved Linda Martinez's life, but had also helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice and prevented him from hurting other innocent people. 6 months later, Sarah was walking her regular beat on Main Street when she spotted a familiar golden figure trotting alongside Mrs. Henderson. Max looked healthy and happy, his medal gleaming on his collar as he greeted everyone they passed with his characteristic friendly demeanor. Since the ceremony, Max had become something of a neighborhood celebrity. Children would run up to pet him and ask Mrs. Henderson to tell them the story of how he had helped catch a bad man. Local shop owners had started keeping special treats behind their counters, specifically for Max, and several had put up small signs declaring their businesses Max-friendly. But the most significant change was in Mrs. Henderson herself. The elderly woman had always been somewhat quiet and kept to herself, but the events surrounding Max's heroic actions had brought her into contact with many more people in the community. She had developed new friendships and seemed more confident and engaged with the world around her. "Good morning, Officer Mitchell," Mrs. Henderson called out cheerfully as Sarah approached. "Max and I were just talking about you this morning, weren't we, Max?" The golden retriever's tail wagged enthusiastically at the sound of Sarah's name, and he immediately came over to greet her with his usual gentle manner. Sarah knelt down to scratch behind his ears, marveling at how normal and peaceful this interaction seemed compared to their first dramatic encounter. "How are you both doing?" Sarah asked, standing up and falling into step beside them as they continued their morning walk. "Wonderful," Mrs. Henderson replied. "Max has been his usual sweet self and we've been enjoying all the attention. Though I have to say, sometimes I worry that all this fame might go to his head." Sarah laughed, looking down at Max, who was busy investigating an interesting smell near a fire hydrant. "I don't think you have to worry about that. He seems as humble as ever." As they walked, Mrs. Henderson shared some of the letters and cards they had received from people around the country who had heard about Max's story. Police departments, animal rescue organizations, and ordinary citizens had all written to express their admiration for the dog's instincts and courage. One letter came from a woman in Oregon whose own dog had alerted her to a break-in at her neighbor's house, Mrs. Henderson said. She said Max's story inspired her to trust her dog's instincts more and to pay attention when he acts unusually. This was exactly the kind of impact Sarah had hoped the story would have. If Max's example could encourage other people to pay attention to their pet's behavior and trust their instincts, it might prevent other crimes or save other lives. They paused in front of Murphy's hardware store, the exact spot where Max had first reacted so violently to David Chen. Sarah looked across the street toward the alley, where they had found the blood evidence that led to Linda Martinez's rescue. The alley had since been cleaned up and was now used as additional parking for one of the nearby businesses. "Do you think Max remembers what happened here?" Sarah asked, watching the dog carefully for any signs of recognition or agitation. Mrs. Henderson considered the question thoughtfully. "I think he does in his own way. Sometimes when we pass this spot, he'll pause and sniff the air extra carefully like he's checking to make sure everything is safe. But he doesn't get upset anymore. I think he knows the danger has passed." Sarah found this observation fascinating. It suggested that Max not only remembered the incident but understood, at least on some level, that his actions had led to a positive resolution. Dogs were remarkable creatures, and Max had proven that their instincts and intelligence were far more sophisticated than many people realized. As they continued their walk, Sarah updated Mrs. Henderson on the latest developments in David Chen's case. The serial predator had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and his conviction had helped close several cold cases in other states. The evidence that Max's initial reaction had led them to discover had been crucial in building the case against Chen. Linda Martinez stops by to visit Max about once a week, Mrs. Henderson mentioned. She says it helps with her recovery to spend time with him. There's something healing about being around the dog who helped save her life. Sarah was glad to hear that Linda was continuing to recover well. The young woman had shown remarkable resilience in dealing with her trauma, and her willingness to testify against Chen had been instrumental in securing his conviction. As they reached the end of their walk, Mrs. Henderson invited Sarah to join them for coffee, as had become their weekly tradition. Over the past 6 months, these informal meetings had become an important part of Sarah's routine, providing her with a chance to decompress and connect with the community she served. Sitting in Mrs. Henderson's comfortable kitchen, with Max lying contentedly at their feet, Sarah reflected on how much this case had changed her approach to police work. She had always been a good observer, but now she paid even more attention to the subtle signs that might indicate trouble. She had also developed a new appreciation for the role that ordinary citizens, and even their pets, could play in keeping their communities safe. Max's story had inspired several other pet owners to report unusual behavior in their animals. And while most of these reports turned out to be harmless, 2 had actually led to the discovery of minor crimes. "You know," Mrs. Henderson said, refilling Sarah's coffee cup, "sometimes I think about what might have happened if I hadn't been walking Max that particular morning, or if you hadn't been there to see his reaction to that man." Sarah had thought about this too. The chain of events that led to Linda's rescue and Chen's capture had depended on so many small coincidences and decisions. If any one element had been different, the outcome might have been tragic. "I think it shows that we're all connected in ways we don't always understand," Sarah replied. "Max's instincts, your willingness to trust him even when his behavior seemed strange, my decision to investigate further, all of these things came together to create something positive." As Sarah prepared to leave and return to her patrol, Max walked her to the door, his tail wagging in the gentle, steady rhythm that had become so familiar and comforting. The golden retriever had no way of knowing that his actions had made him a hero, but his natural goodness and keen instincts continued to make the world a little bit safer and brighter for everyone around him. Walking back down Main Street, Sarah thought about the lessons this experience had taught her about courage, instinct, and the importance of paying attention to the world around us. Sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms, and sometimes the most important messages are delivered by those who cannot speak but know exactly how to communicate what matters most. Max had shown that heroism isn't always about dramatic gestures or extraordinary abilities. Sometimes it's simply about trusting your instincts, standing your ground when something feels wrong, and refusing to be ignored when you're trying to protect someone. In that regard, the golden retriever had been the perfect example of quiet, persistent courage. The case had also reinforced Sarah's belief in the value of community policing and building relationships with the people she served. If she hadn't known Mrs. Henderson and Max, if she hadn't taken the time to investigate what seemed like a minor incident, a dangerous criminal might have continued to operate freely, and an innocent woman might have lost her life. As she resumed her patrol, Sarah made a mental note to stop by the local animal shelter later that week. Max's story had inspired her to volunteer with their community outreach programs, helping to educate people about the important role pets can play in keeping neighborhoods safe and connected. The golden retriever had taught an entire community that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that sometimes the most important contributions come from those who ask for nothing in return except the chance to protect the people they love.